right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's TST meeting. We have actually a number of items on the agenda, but before we dive into those, first of all, I would like to acknowledge Jen's tenacious tackling of the Apache Carafe 4.0. And it was a reasonably sized story, but it ended up being a little bit more work than we originally thought, but I think it's definitely well worth it. So I really appreciate it, Jen, for you taking it on. And also the version bump of all of the plugins and dependencies, that's also really needed to bring us up to date with everything. So thanks a lot.
Very nice.
Regarding the other items on the agenda, today we will be talking about a proposal that I have for DriverBasedProvider, also a proposal for restructuring the drivers directory to address some issues, and I'll describe what those issues are. And also a few other smaller items. So I'm gonna first probably give the floor to Brian to announce to make your announcement.
Sure. Yeah. So do you want to just go to Garrett quickly?
Yes.
So as of about 30 minutes ago, we have a new module owners plugin. This is sort of on the heels of our successful initial pilot and some of the announcements that David sent out. There were three basic enhancements. The first you can view on this page, which is the addition of a module owner label. So when a code review is done by a module owner, you'll see it here. And then if you click on a change and then apply a code review to the change, you'll see that module owners have their code review labels replicated. So now, at a glance, someone can see whether a module owner has contributed a code review to this. The second enhancement is you'll note that this review has a bunch of people on it. There's two ways in which reviewers get added. One is by git blame. So I think the blame plugin's configured to pick the top 2 or 3 reviewers based on lines changed, max lines changed. And then we also pick the 3 most specific module owners and assign them. We can tweak the numbers. Maybe we want 2 and 3 or 2 and 2, whatever. But that's also happening automatically now. And then the third bit of feedback is if you go to projects, you can just click on the projects button. Projects, list, and then ONOS.
The question is how
second ONOS.
How do I get blamed for that? I don't think I really think.
And then if you click reviewers, or sorry, module owners at the top, we now have a list of the paths for each individual contributor or module owner is a member on. So those are the 3 enhancements. Like I said, the plugin's live now. If you run into any bugs, let me know.
Very nice.
But this should enable us to continue to expand our pilot. The other thing is we have slightly better integration now. The module owner label will show up as a requirement when you try to submit a patch in the top corner. So a few little other tweaks, but that's that.
Very cool. Nice. Thanks. And I presume, David, you will make this link to the module owner.
On the wiki. Yeah, I need to move stuff over to the wiki.
So that it's accessible directly from me.
And if anyone wants to volunteer to style this page, you're more than welcome to. This is MVP, as they say.
Sounds great. Thanks, Brian. This is really good to have. And by the way, I should mention that there were 3 things on the list, and only one of them was really planned for this sprint, but Brian tackled them all at once just to avoid context switching and to give us the community visibility.
That's awesome.
From the get code. So thanks for doing that. It's awesome. So I think also, can I give the floor to you, David and Ali, to talk about the spring cleaning, or
sure.
you want to do that later on?
That's fine. I had shared the doc with you, or I could take over the.
Are you in? Well, the thing is, we're recording this session. So,
okay.
So are you on a Hangout?
Oh, I could be. Sorry.
If you want to change the link on the wiki to link to the presentation. Or if you have a presentation and you want to link to it, you can change it on the wiki.
Okay, I can add it there.
And then we can all see it, and also Thomas can switch to it.
Okay, so why don't you, while you're doing that, let me then move forward with the proposal for the driver,
Okay.
and then I'll let you update the page, and we'll hand over the presentation then. So let me talk about this proposal for restructuring the driver source tree and module structure. So today we have a little bit of a problem. First of all, the ONOS drivers module is becoming increasingly dependent on more and more stuff, because we're adding different behaviors implemented with the need of different protocols, netconf, OVSDP, BGPLS, and whatnot. Now the problem is, because the ONOS drivers are prerequisite for enabling the flow objectives. Basically, if you were to disable the default driver provider service, ONOS disassembles. So there needs to be an implementation of this default driver provider service available in order for the core systems to function. And so that causes a problem. That causes basically a bloat. So the idea here is to avoid that bloat by segregating the default drivers, which implement this core service, and which would also deliver the pipeliner and the base OpenFlow switch drivers for the various generic devices as sort of the base. And that would be delivered with ONOS by default. And then we have two alternatives. We can then either separate the rest of the drivers based on the specific device families into their own module. So you would have Sienna devices, or potentially multiple drivers for Sienna, Huawei, Fujitsu, whatnot. So that's one way. And this could include also overrides for the specific pipeliner or flow switch drivers. An sort of fallback alternative is to separate the drivers based on the protocols that they use. So that would be netconf drivers, OVSDB drivers, and so forth. Now, the reason I prefer, at least in my view, the preferred alternative would be to divide it based on device rather than based on protocol, is for a couple of reasons. First of all, it allows the devices to support a mixture of protocols. Because you may have let's say, Sienna driver that supports a lot of things through OpenFlow, but maybe some things through REST, custom protocol, right? Also, it allows the administrator explicit control over what they install in their deployment, because they generally will have an idea of what devices they need to support, and they install drivers for those devices. They're good to go, and this results in less bloat in the overall deployment. So for that particular reason, I like that model best. And the resulting directory structure would still contain the default, and I would take whatever's currently under drivers, which is really the default, move a subsection of it into the default, and then segregate the rest of it by either vendor or by specific product families. This is just an example of what it could look like. So that's what I would prefer, but I may not have thought of all of the different downsides to it. The fallback alternative would separate it based on protocol, but in my view, that would be less ideal. So that's just a heads up that I think we should do this, and we should probably have maybe additional discussion after everybody had a chance to digest it over email. This probably change would be made. I'm thinking of making this in a Falcon timeframe, because we'll be introducing some drivers for support of the eCord use case, and that's also related to the other proposal. And I would like to curb the bloat in the default ONOS installation as soon as possible. So that's that. So David, are you ready to cover the community?
Yeah.
A question for Thomas. So a couple things. It seems that there are a couple things that are being conflated here in a way that I guess I don't understand the rationale for. Sort of one is packaging, like, well, what things do you want to get by default? And the other is whether a driver is generic, like a generic OpenFlow 1.0 switch driver, versus a specific driver. It seems to me that those are two different things that you don't necessarily want to conflate. And it also seems to me that if you have a set of generic drivers, like a generic OpenFlow driver, a generic netconf driver, a generic OESDB driver, that you might you might have new devices that come online that you probably just use the generic drivers. You're like, oh, well, I can use generic OpenFlow 1.3. And so it seems that they're the packaging for sort of deployment purposes and use and sort of usage shouldn't necessarily be bound tightly to the directory structure of the code. It seems that the code structure should facilitate kind of administration and sort of code sharing and administration.
So they are separate things. The reason they're conflated on a single slide is because they're separate concerns, but they will have an effect on two different things. One will have an effect on the directory structure, and I think we should reflect it in the directory structure. At least the ONOS drivers that are present in the ONOS code base. They could be drivers that are supplied by somebody else that are completely in a separate repo that the deployers can install. It's not a problem. But they're not really directly related.
Yeah, so I guess my question for you is, why have a default? Why don't we have, like, OpenFlow generic, netconf generic, OBSDB generic, and why do we call it default rather than generic? I guess.
I mean, we could call it,
or just OpenFlow.
We could call it generic. My thought was to prevent over segmentation would be just to put all of the base drivers, the default ones, the generic ones, under the default. So that was the thought. And not segregated from that point onward. And right now, that is what's envisioned to exist in default would be the base OpenFlow behaviors, which you want to support, and also the pipeliner behaviors, which deal with basically support for just the generic pipelines, right?
And do you think there's a reason for bundling, for having the codes, the directory structure reflect the packaging and bundling in this way when it doesn't necessarily for other things? See, what's strange is like netconf is here, right, as a top level, but what if we decide? What if we decide?
This is the fallback.
Oh, this is the fallback.
So if you look at the preferred.
Okay, yeah. Oh, that's default.
That would be.
Right. Okay, yeah. So this is yeah. So I guess the idea is, okay, if somebody makes a driver like generic SNMP, for example, and then we decide to promote it to a default, then things become a little strange, because then if, like, the SNMP directory goes away and then it moves to default. But I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, it should be fine. It should be. It could be done as part of regular refactoring.
Yeah, so I guess that's the one we had. It seems that there is a sort of semantic distinction which you may or may not want to emphasize in the directory structure, which is, things that are bundled with ONOS things that are part of the default bundle of ONOS versus drivers that are generic.
Got it. Okay. Thanks. All right. So can I hand it over to you?
Yeah, sure. So I'll share my screen.
Yep, please. And just bump me out. Should be able to do that.
Okay. And I have a link to this in the.
You might need to change the.
On the wiki.
Send to.
Yeah, on the wiki there's a link to it. I said it's.
Oh, terrific. That looks great.
Oh.
So I'll make you present to everybody. How's that?
All right. Oh, great. There we go. Okay. Great. So this was an idea that Ali and I put together, and Ali, feel free to jump in. There we go. Sorry, it was taking a minute. Firefox was taking a minute to make it bigger. We're calling this the spring cleaning proposal, and it's basically an idea that's, one theme that I've heard over the last few months since I've been here is that we're all overwhelmed. So the idea here is, how do we free up our time? And I think we get into this pattern where, because there's always so much coming in and there's always so much we need to do in the short term, we do some things that are quick solutions in the short term, but over time they create debt for us, and it ends up, we end up saving time in the short term, but yet losing time longer term, by having to do maintenance, having to do a number of other things that, are a result of this quick fix. Just as an example, I think when we need to get a release out, we need to get the release out so the people who know how to do it just do it. So a lot of stuff that could be documented, for example, stays in their head because it's quicker just to go ahead and do the thing versus taking the time to write it out and taking the steps to share it with other people and bring them up to speed. So the cost of doing that, the community side of doing that, is there are people out there who could help us with these things and free up our time by taking them on, but yet they don't even know that these are options to do because we're not sharing that information. We're not pausing and taking the time to get that out there as something that I'm currently doing and would love it if you help me with going forward. Anything to? So one idea that we have here, and this is on the proposed solution idea, is just to intentionally take a pause, take the time to identify what we're doing today that community members could help us with, and then document that. And we would document that through a process of creating a backlog of what we're calling spring cleaning items that aren't getting addressed on the regular release-focused sprint process that we have now. And once we build up that backlog, we can have the TST evaluate the value of those and see if this is something we want to commit our time to or not. I suspect just from anecdotal conversations with people that there's a lot of valuable things that would come up in this process. And if we make the decision, yes, this is something that there's value with, we could create a 1-month sprint specifically focused on those spring cleaning tasks versus a release to take care of these specific items that have been identified. And if this process was good, we can make it a regular yearly or bi-yearly or 18-monthly thing, going forward. Just like spring cleaning is something that you do at your house every year. And I think there's a lot of value in doing this. One, as we talked about up front, this will free us up. I think we have to invest some time up front, so there'll be a cost, but then longer term, there'll be a return on that investment with having our time freed up. And I think this is going to allow us to tap into people who have expertise that we're not tapping into today. Again, with the release management example, I came from a community in Mozilla that had a very active volunteer-run release management community. I know that's the case in other open source communities as well, and that's something we're not tapping into today, but could if we took some time to invest in that. And again, that's just an example. I would love to hear, if other people have other thoughts that they think would be relevant for this sort of spring cleaning idea. And I think one other positive is that it will improve our community relations and help us overcome any concerns that there might be out there about us not being open enough. And then Ali and I put a couple of examples in here in addition to the release process one that might resonate with people. And again, we're hoping that other people would have other ideas we could add to this. But I think documentation in general falls under this bucket. It's something that we probably know we should do, but just don't have the time to do it, and it's quicker and easier not to. But yet, there's a, if we did take the pause, there's a return on having that documentation being there. Another one that Ali had pointed out is we're not necessarily always upstreaming fixes to other open source projects that we use, and there's a definite cost associated with that. If there's a patch that we have, it might be easier not to upstream it, but yet every time that open source project makes a release, do we have to go back and fix that patch and bring it up to date? That's a debt, that we're incurring longer term, even if it saved us time in the shorter term. So I kind of blew through that because I wanted it to be more of a conversation, but I don't know if you have.
No, you covered this really well.
Great.
I don't have anything to add.
Does this resonate with people? Are there other ideas that, if we had the space for spring cleaning that you think would be appropriate?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's spring cleaning, but there are definitely a lot of kind of, you might consider important but not urgent.
Yeah.
Things that get perpetually deferred. Like, for example, making it so we don't need to do that Maven, you don't need to do a clean build every time, which takes 11 minutes, and that an IDE actually works. Things like that. There are these things that have high leverage and are really important, but are never urgent, so they never make it into the sprint.
It doesn't directly impact the next release that you're working on.
Exactly. Yeah. Even though it's something that, the sooner we do it, if we did it now, we'd benefit from it for the rest of the year, forever. Really, it'd be just great, right? Yeah. So there are a lot of things like that.
This also fits into the larger conversation is how to, it's kind of focused on engaging the community, and not only engaging programmers, but engaging people who are not necessarily coders, but people who do release management, people who do documentation, people who do who handle people out there who handle packages in upstreaming in Ubuntu. I don't want to. I don't know if any of you want to, but does anybody here want to build a dev file and maintain it? And
not dev, but RPM sorry, CentOS. I totally live for it.
Yeah, exactly. So we've got one volunteer. So thank you. And here's the point.
Well, actually, it's the job of the release to do that.
Yeah, it is. But what I'm saying
the job of CentOS is release to make a CentOS RPM.
Sure. But what I'm saying is like, do we? I mean, let me speak for myself.
Yeah.
I don't want to waste my time building RPMs and making sure that they get upstreamed into the right projects, into the right Linux distributions or devs or whatever, because I hate it. And that's one. And secondly, I don't have the time for it. Frankly, like I don't have time. I don't have the interest for it. And there are people who love doing that, surprisingly. Right? And that's great. Like let them. But the only way we can get them, and the only way we can get them to the point where someone will stand up and say, "I'll do this for you," is if we put it out and advertise it and make it clear to people. And in that process, it'll free up a whole bunch of us, especially during releases or even like even for documentation. Like it'll just free us up to actually do what we care about, right? Sure. And then let offload some of that weight onto other people.
Sure. So as we were discussing earlier, I think a number of these items can be done without really taking a pause. It would be just taking a momentary pause when you have an idea about, let's say, oh, I need help with something. Please write it down in reasonable detail as a story or ticket, right, in Jira. It doesn't have to take very much time beyond just jotting down the note or an idea. But I think in some of these cases, we may have deeper requirements that may take longer, and I think this is where we may actually need to we have certain expectations, certain ideas how things should be done, but we don't have time to do them. And so this is what may take time, I think, to take a pause and actually working through what it is that we would like to accomplish, or at least specifically being the end product.
So I think we should start building up a backlog.
Yeah.
Maybe create an epic for this and build a backlog. And as that backlog gets bigger, there'll be evident things which are like small. We can bite off quickly on the side if we feel like it. But I think the important thing that we're trying to propose here is if we don't take the time to engage people out there correctly, we can't do this in an ad hoc way. It needs to be like, we need to be focused on it and really go for it, and all of us move together in engaging the community. If we just take a week here and there just to try and talk to someone or trying to get them, well, we're not going to get anything. We're not going to get a return for it. It has to feel like we're really putting all this information out there, and really pushing it out in a way that kind of shakes up the community a little bit, makes them realize, hey, there are things I can do here now, as opposed to now where people are like, well, if I don't code, I can't help them, or if I don't know this or know that, I can't help them. Make it much clearer so that people can come on to this.
Echoing what David said, I think there's a good argument for doing kind of periodically for a variety of reasons. Sort of iteration you can improve on. You can improve on last year's, whatever we did last year, and you can sort of learn from it. You have a little bit of time out from it, and also it doesn't burn too much of our time because it's like a once a year kind of effort, and hopefully it won't completely rot by the next year, and things won't. I mean, there has to be follow up, obviously, but I think if it's a periodic thing and not a continuous thing, not a continuous drain on people's effort, then I think people at ONLab will be more interested in going for it. And I also, I also want to echo all these sort of comments that there's a lot of stuff that we're doing that maybe we could outsource, or that there are if we could find people who are a good match for it, who would like to do it, then it'd be really great to get them involved. And the Mozilla example about external release engineering, that's kind of exciting. Like, I didn't know they actually did that. So that's kind of encouraging. I think that's really worth pursuing.
But to get to the point where we have these kind of things going, we really have to. It doesn't just happen, right?
Yeah, it takes intentionality.
It's not that we put on the wiki, we say, hey, we'd like some release guy to come along and do it.
No, we probably have to. I mean, somebody probably has to sit down and work with them for a period of months.
Not even that. It's also like documenting what we want, or just putting it out there in a way that someone has all the tools they would need to build it. Right?
So I think good starting steps would definitely be either to generate an epic for this, or at least a label, so we can identify, because actually the activities may actually span multiple different epics, right? So maybe there's a label, so we can identify these things. And then if they're small enough and self-explanatory enough, then people can start nibbling in them right up from the get-go, right? And I think there will be some of the bigger ones, especially like around the release process or other areas that will require probably more concentrated effort.
I mean, I feel like there's also like technical writers out there in the community who know how to write. I mean, Ayaka is great at writing documentation. I suck at writing documentation, but I mean, I'm sure there's people out there who do this, right? And who would be happy to do that and contribute documentation. And encouraging people to do this is the hard part.
Sure.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because we have a chicken and egg situation. Ayaka and I have actually been promoting people getting involved in documentation, and people have actually shown up, but we don't know what to ask them to do yet. There's 4, yeah, we were just talking about this earlier. We've been making this information clear around the wiki and driving more traffic to it. We created a Slack channel, an ONOS doc Slack channel. We've got 14 people showing up, and several people have said, hey, tell me what to do.
Really?
We don't know what to tell them to do yet.
Really?
And the thing is, like with documentation, you can document like the technical details of a piece of software, or you can also document your experience using some.
Yeah, but that's a really good point. I mean, it sounds like we're not adequately tracking the documentation for a release. But the documentation tasks and the documentation like level of completion for release.
Sorry, I mean, maybe I'm just a little bit sensitive, but release seems to get picked on over and over again. We have a 5-page document on all of the steps, and most of them are automated for the release. Are they visible? Have we generated documentation for this stuff? Not as good as it could be, but someone who wanted to run a release by themselves could look at the doc that we have and do it. So sorry,
Well,
it's just
that's
because it's just kind of
awesome.
it's been building up here
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it just keeps coming up as an example.
Well, maybe that
This
was
is
a-
one example of somewhere where we don't have fully documented and automated. We have mostly documented and mostly automated.
And maybe it's not a fair example.
The point is not to.
The point is to pick on Brian. But besides that, I think what you're saying is
No,
something
yeah.
really
So
good,
I guess,
which is that we're a lot closer to this. Like we're probably pretty close to this in terms of like you've done a lot of good work already to automate and document the build process. And so if we wanted to outsource it, it might be something that we could totally do.
Yeah.
It'd be really nice.
I mean, there's
something, but little, or exactly. Go ahead, sorry.
There's definitely a lot of opportunities, right? Like when we have a kind of half-baked deb, we have an even less baked RPM. That it would be great if we could have someone that had experience building these, getting these things upstreamed into Ubuntu, into Red Hat, into Fedora, into CentOS. I mean, I think we've got very little experience as an organization doing that, and if we had someone who was willing to help pull up this project in, that would be great. And for them, they'd need to know sort of how to build the stuff.
Yeah. So that's what I was getting. Mostly was that tail end of the list that you specified is what I was taking from.
But hey, if
here,
someone
because
wanted to take
right, because I
ownership
know
of-
I'm fully well aware of,
This is one of my points, is that like all that you guys have done is fantastic, and no one's like saying, "Oh, this is crap, we should change it." That's not at all what we're saying. It's great. The point is do you want to continue spending time on it, and you want to always like it's an iterative process. You're adding things to it, and you're making it better. But do you really want to moving forward? Do you really want to take ownership of it, knowing that other things are going to get tacked onto it that are going to make your life harder and more busy when you have other things to do. I mean, I don't know. I mean, if you want to take it on and say, "This is mine," so be it. But if we can outsource things that are like kind of ancillary to the ONOS code base, right? Then this saves up time for us, and it's not at all criticism. I'm criticizing myself here as well. Like,
Sure.
It's like I haven't documented flow objects. It's not my fault, right? But I mean, like that's cool. Like this is fine, right? I'm just saying, like the idea is that as we move along, we build pieces of software or scripts or whatever, right? And all of this is debt that we have to maintain, right? Whether we like it or not. Right?
No, I completely agree with the idea. I just, sorry, it was a
Yeah.
So I guess I was
framed it the wrong way.
reaction, sorry.
And so I think, like for me, ideally, out of this effort, is if we get to a state where we've engaged 1, 2, maybe 3 people, that's a successful story already. And secondly, if we have the kind of ideology within ON Lab where we say that whenever I build a piece of software for a project, my goal should be to upstream it to that project, if I build a piece of software that has no project, I open source something. Such that like we reduce the burden on us for ancillary items. Kind of like an open source outsourcing.
Yeah, and to add to that, I mean, again, just like with the release stuff, we've been doing that to a degree.
Yeah.
We just probably need to be disciplined of doing that more often and be on lookout for opportunities to do it more aggressively.
And if you were given the space, are there things that you would be
Yes.
doing that you're not doing?
Yes. But some of that will, and I think this is to your point, some of that will take a little bit of pause to gather ourselves, right? Not to do things completely ad hoc and spontaneously.
No.
Some of it needs to be just take a time out.
So
Take a breath.
one example, right, is the scripts that we use to build the demo VMs,
Mhm.
like either development environment or demo VMs, right?
Yeah.
We have a whole collection of scripts. Most of them actually come from Mininet, and we've adapted some of them for ONOS, but that's a whole collection of stuff. The Mininet ones are open as part of the Mininet project, but the additions in ONOS aren't.
Yeah.
They're open in the sense that there's some code on a GitHub repo that's publicly available, but we sort of lack documentation. I mean, there's a whole bunch of opportunity people could come in and do, but like picking it up and getting started is hard.
Yeah, and I think this is
Also,
what this.
I don't necessarily trust someone else to do it.
Well, no,
Right,
no.
exactly.
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing about like things like the release process is like, will this person do it right? And I mean,
Well, so hold on.
there's
hold on.
trade-offs.
Yeah.
That I agree. You're right. Well, this person, but if he does it wrong, that's okay. You know why? Because we have a chance to correct him, right? And handhold him through that process. It's more important to get someone engaged and get him to do something wrong initially than engage no one and take responsibility.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
I completely agree with what Ollie just said there, right?
Do you have a T-shirt for that?
No, and I think a lot of these things were done out of sheer necessity in the beginning, right?
Yeah.
Because we wanted to have ONOS easily
You gotta get
deployable,
something.
easily get it, and so we did them ourselves because there was simply
What else? are you
no
gonna
time to do anything different. But I think, as Ali said, over time, things, variants of the distributions, Debians, Ubuntu Launchpads, whatnot, will come in. Let's say this release process, or additional source tools will be available, will be produced, and not to incur the continuous burden for maintenance of that stuff. It's best if you take time, document it, and sort of put it out in the open, and that way the community can take ownership for it. And hopefully then will give us more time to spend on some of the core features, which are more cutting and more core to what our mission is, right? Which is advancing the state of
our
network
mission
quality.
is build the ONOS platform.
Yeah.
Our mission isn't to upload to Ubuntu, which it's ancillary,
Yes,
but
it's
someone can do it.
Yeah, no, I mean, like having distributions, for whatever, Red Hat, Ubuntu, Debian, CentOS, whatever. I mean, that's clearly something that is done by those projects, right? And it's going to be done by those projects, or it won't be done at all, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we could, for example, there's a complicated process to become an Ubuntu core committer, which I haven't gone through because I much prefer that James Page do it. So he does it better. He's already won it, and I don't have to do it. It's great. And same thing with Debian. There's a Debian guy, I forget his name, who also does the Debian side of it. It makes me very happy.
Yeah, exactly. That's the whole idea. I mean, that's the whole idea. And
That's a good example.
that's all we're suggesting.
Yeah.
In a way, is identify the large ticket items that require some kind of kind of like a pause, stop the world event, and address them, but address them fully. If we take the approach that we've taken in the past, where we just have a release, chill out for a week, try to figure out what we need to do. By the end of the week, it's Friday. We've maybe added a couple lines here, done sent an email there, and that's about it. But if we spend a month and we treat it as a sprint and we really do it once and for all, well, not once and for all, but once at least, and next iterations of such an event can be shorter. We have to do it once correctly. And that takes time. I mean, it's like dealing with people, being social. Doesn't come for free. It takes time, right?
I mean, the dealing with people part, that part does take time, but also getting your stuff to a point, like some of the ancillary scripts and other things that we have in various places, to a point where you can hand them off, is not a task that we should underestimate.
No.
And I think that's the point of that
That's what I'm saying.
Exactly.
That's exactly what I'm
4
saying.
weeks is substantial.
Yeah.
Maybe not enough, even, but.
Yeah, maybe it's not enough. Maybe it is. Maybe.
Yeah, I think there's
One
a lot
month-
of
one
cleanup
month-
that
one-
we
well,
should
actually-
do also.
It's not 1 month. It's 2 months. But but there are reasons why it's 2 months, but it's not really 2 months. Whatever. It's not very important. But what I'm saying is, yes, you're right. It takes a long time to get to a point. It's also the realization that in some cases, the way we've done certain things, right, if taken by like a professional of that particular subject, might be done completely different. Is accepting that fact as well, right? In some cases, like I don't know, we use Jira, we use Wiki or Confluence to do our documentation. And somebody's like, come on, it's much better, right? For I don't know, for whatever reason, and he proves it to you by A plus B that it's better. Sure. What are you gonna do, right? You're gonna be like, okay, cool, fantastic.
You might seek control.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and that's okay, right? These things are okay. Like, we have a grown-up kid here.
So in terms of the sort of next steps for this stuff, do you guys have any sort of idea of what we should? So, because I mean, one item would, for example, we would be selling it to Bill and Guru, right? Where are we gonna have are we gonna be able to sell an idea of a little bit of a breather?
Yeah, before we go through the process of creating the backlog and everything.
So first we need a backlog. Like a significant, not significant.
So start building that.
Yes, okay. Start building that backlog. Then we need a lot of alcohol to give to Guru. No, but
who doesn't drink?
I'm just saying. Force feed it.
I mean, does this sound like a non-starter bill, or is this something worth pursuing?
It's worth pursuing. If the technical team feels it's worth pursuing.
Yeah, ultimately, I mean,
you
guys should make the decision, right? It's like, is it needed for the project? And
the point is that our objective in ONLab is to build ONOS as an open source project. If we don't engage the community, what's the point? Right? What's the point of having an open source project if the community cannot be engaged correctly?
Well, I think that's a pretty strong statement. Right?
It is. I only work with structure.
The community is.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of
engaged to a certain level, right? You could a different level, right?
Yeah. So I think what the point here is
it's
one the point more mildly would be to engage the broader spectrum of the community and potentially offload the technical team or the core team here in ONLab for doing things that are closer to our mission.
Okay.
And to scale, basically, it would scale. Would it help increase the scale of the of our effectiveness?
Regarding iteration.
So, but speaking about political correctness, so I think I'm going to, because we could keep talking in circles, I'm going to switch topics. Is that all right? Do you think we bound it up enough, or do we want to close it off a little tighter, a little neater?
No, we're gonna move on to creating that either epic or label or whatever we decide to create, and then just encourage people to populate it.
Yep.
So, when you say encourage people to populate it, what would an example task be?
So again,
are these tasks for us to prepare these things, or are these tasks that we want
that we would do in that session?
In that session.
And the point is that like anything that comes through your head that you think would be worthwhile should be put there, and then we'll, as a TST, will sit down and review them, and then sort them out and prioritize them, right? And then we'll figure out which ones are valuable, which ones are big enough, and we'll
So I agree with that, but also in addition to these meta tasks,
it's like which are
but
tasks,
also
which are
put
meta
also
tasks.
the tasks themselves. So, for example, an example here is the Apache Graph 4.0 upgrade.
Yeah.
I mean, Jen picked it up, but I mean, this is something that's major enough that somebody else, and it's ancillary enough that somebody else from the outside could have done, right? Now, they might not have had as easy time doing it because they're not as close to it, but that's an example of actual task rather than a meta task, right? But in some of these will be meta in the sense that will actually it's work for us to do to get the collateral or our information, extract information out of our heads to a point where we could engage the community at large to help us with these things.
Yeah. So it sounds like having the label and some example tickets is helpful.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, to your point though, right? Like, is this epic for both the meta tasks and because the ancillary task would not necessarily be tackled during the spring cleaning sprint, right? The ancillary tasks are things that are now ready for anyone to pick up.
I hear what you're saying.
Whereas the meta task would need to be done by presumably the team that has the knowledge in order to prepare.
So I would, but without overthinking it, I would just. If an idea, just toss it all in there, and we can figure out what requires more work internally versus what could be handed off right now. And that way we don't overthink it too much.
Presumably,
Don't get too hung up.
these tasks would be in multiple epics. Like you might have a documentation task, which is probably in the
Yeah,
documentation epic also.
I would suggest we don't. Yeah, we keep the epics for what they are used right now and just use a label to identify.
Some sort of label and some sort of set of examples.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Great. Thanks.
Okay. So we'll switch topics really briefly. I think we have 15 minutes for the last one. Let me present to everybody. Wait.
What's the last topic?
That's the last topic, yes.
What is it?
And that's the device-based. You want to stay for that?
Yeah, the one we talked about. The open flow provider,
Oh, it's
Sorry,
default
finding here.
providers and
I thought that was
drivers.
already, that was covered in the first topic.
So that it was simply subdividing the drivers in some folders.
Precise in the sense.
Yeah. So the second driver-related topic is as follows. Let me switch to full screen here. So today the devices, what we find out is the devices expose their capabilities in many different ways and through different protocols, not just one. Okay. So what that means is that a single protocol provider is unlikely to achieve all of the full spectrum of capability. And because today we don't have any fallback provider for all of the primary subsystems like flow, rule, packet, root, meter, just some examples. Basically, if a provider is not supplied for that specific protocol or family of providers, then that capability is not accessible at all. And also, furthermore, some of the fixed function subsystems like groups and meters offer only selective. Even though the device supports the protocol, it doesn't support the capability. So we have some issues that we need to address. And so I want to, let's say with the E-cord, some of the devices that are going to be used for demonstration, they require use of REST to get certain things done. And so, because we don't have any REST providers, and I want to avoid setting a precedent where applications will be tempted to bypass the provider abstraction and instead go directly to drivers to accomplish the same thing. That's so essentially subverting the core abstraction. I would like to propose making the following change, where before I go about the change, let me speak about the goals. So the idea is I want to protect the ease of use of the existing fixed function services and their abstractions. Okay, so the apps will continue to use them. That's one of the goals. I would like to then introduce a fallback driver with driver service integration that would be used as if there is no driver, there's no provider for this thing, let's use this fallback one. That would help us. I would also like to improve support for devices using legacy protocols, and also allow mix and match, which we don't today allow really easily, and also to enable selective support for some of the capabilities the devices have in the fixed function subsystems. And also, if you were to inspect our existing providers, there's some boilerplate code that this could help eliminate. So currently, what happens is the fixed function subsystem. Now, these are those device link and host are a little bit different. We do have, because they're generally not protocol specific. They're somewhat different. But the device related ones are device, packet, flow, group, and meter. And so what happens is the device provider discovers the device and assigns it a unique device ID, which is backed by URI. Now, the scheme of the URI is essentially identifies the family of providers, and that scheme is also used for downward dispatching from the core to the providers. So basically, if a URI has an OF prefix, the OF-based providers will be engaged. If it has a netc or netconf, it'll use the netconf ones, and so forth. But if you really pause and think, today really pretty much the only one that's capable of supporting the full breadth using a single protocol is OF. Even netconf, right? You can do a lot of configuration stuff, but you can't do certain things. With OVSDB, you can't do certain things. So do you see the problem here, right? And well, so So generally what we do is when we support a protocol, the providers were supposed to be protocol-centric. So we supply, but the providers are individual entities. There's host, flow, and so forth, provider. But they're supplied generally as an entity, as a bundle of these things together that provide support across all of the fixed functions. But the problem is, as I said, most of the protocols don't allow you to do all of these things, at least not through simple means. And because, basically, because if the device is identified by a URI scheme and there is no downward basis for delegation, that capability is today not accessible at all. So that would force applications to try to do things differently using drivers, for example. And we want to avoid that at all costs. So that generally also clearly makes it very awkward to mix and match protocols, right, using this scheme. So the idea here is to modify the core subsystems, the fixed function subsystems, to have a built-in fallback provider, call it a default provider. And the default provider would only be dispatched to if no other specific provider, protocol-specific provider was supplied. And then that provider would then lean on driver service and would engage analog, there would be sort of driver behaviors that would be defined to mimic the provider interface, but would slightly be modified because there's some slight differences. After all, when you're dealing with a device driver, you're dealing with a specific device already. So, for example, the coordinate of a device ID would be completely omitted. So the idea here is that that provider would then lean on driver service and find the right driver, determine if the driver supports that behavior that's specific to it, and then engage that behavior. So it would essentially become as a proxy, would act as a proxy. So for example, the packet provider then could be backed by packet emitter behavior, or flow rule provider could be backed by some flow rule control behavior, or whatever. These are just some sample names, right? The idea is that this would then act as a proxy. It also could act as a cache for the necessary driver handler instances, which provide some connection, or at least even if it's a connectionless protocol, it still provides some sort of a state for converging with that device. Not distributed state, but still some sort of an overtime state. And general picture would look like this. You have the manager that would still lean on the existing set of providers. But if none was matching, it would engage the default provider, which would then use the driver service to obtain necessary handler behaviors for conversing with the device. And the behavior itself would then isolate the use of the protocol and address the use of the protocol. And so this would provide a nice, elegant way to use both of the device driver subsystem as well as the provider subsystem. Would allow us to really, really easily mix and match the different protocols to accomplish, wider array of functionality. Now the driver, the subsystem would still be used for configuration tasks directly by applications, like configuring POE or power levels for optical devices and whatever other provisioning tasks. But the fixed function subsystems would remain the same. So. One observation is, if you really look at things closely, today the OpenFlow provider already uses drivers within to absorb the device-specific nuances, right? Also, notice that if you squint and look at it from a longer perspective, you could eventually rewrite all of the providers out of existence by just simply rehousing all of the functionality into the driver behavior. So eventually we could end up with just the default provider, and everything else is in drivers, delivered as drivers. There's nothing wrong with that. Even though the provider abstraction would still be valuable because it provides, that layer provides houses a set of functionality which would really not belong to the driver layer, like housing the driver context and stuff like that.
There's one little, I guess it's a subtle difference. The provider right now handles a family of a set of devices.
Yes.
Whereas a driver is ignited per device.
Correct.
So we'd have to somehow.
Well, correct. But this is what the provider would still maintain, right? That the layer of a provider, whether it's a default one or protocol specific one, would still be used because it would allow caching of the context and stuff like that.
Maybe we have to be careful because if you have multiple instances, so for example, I mean, I'm taking a stupid example, but if I take the flow rule provider,
Yes.
right, and for every device I have an instance of a flow rule provider,
Yes.
Because we're using the same mechanism as the driver, I mean, the amount of resources consumed will explode.
Yes. Yes. So you would have a driver, but not a. You might have a driver.
Yeah, but
not a provider. Yes.
Yeah, you see, I mean, like you have to be careful not to
Understood.
duplicate, because then when the flow provider uses something like, I don't think it's 32 threads right now. So imagine if you have 100 devices connected and you have 100 times 32.
Oh no, completely agree. Yes.
So you have to be careful that like provider is not getting duplicated.
No, provider should. There should be one default provider per subsystem, so there should be 5 or something like that.
Yeah, but yes, I agree. Yeah,
Yes.
But just the way they're delivered.
Yes.
So have to be careful.
Yeah, and it's really more a function of we need to be more careful with what's part of the driver behavior, because that's what multiplies.
Yeah. What does this enable you to do today or to do that you can't easily do today?
Well, today it's really difficult to get a single device with multiple protocols. For the fixed function subsystem. For the configuration tasks, that's separate, because we don't use that UR scheme for dispatching. But so the idea is that this will actually increase the cohesion of how we use and sort of consistency with how we use the driver subsystem. Plus, it will eliminate some of the boilerplate code, potential boilerplate code that would arise if we had protocol-specific providers for things like netconf or VSDB and stuff like that.
I think also the problem today is that, like, in some cases, if you confuse configuration and like programming, you can write a driver that programs a device, like as in like pushes down flows and skips the entire core, skips the entire.
That would be huge
and
problem.
you wanna avoid that kind of stuff. So for example, somebody decides to write a netconf flow rule provider, right? They can do that, and they can skip the entire core. They can skip everything, and they don't even know that these flows exist, right? And we want to make it.
If it's a flow rule provider, why wouldn't ONOS know about it?
Because the say he's using flow objectives, goes through the flow objective system, hits the driver then turns around and goes straight to the device, right? And doesn't go through the core, doesn't go through the flow rule service.
Right, it went through flow objectives.
Flow objectives don't track anything. Right? Flow objectives don't have any state.
It seems to me this is turning ONOS into more and more of a multi-vendor EMS solution away from a controller is my concern around this, right? It's really opening up this door to say, oh, look, now you got a place to put any code you want, and now it's not only dealing with the control plane capabilities, what a controller is supposed to deal with, but it can deal anything you want.
So it's a valid concern, but let me tell you why that's really not the case. First of all, we did introduce drivers to allow ONOS to engage with configurations, because configuration is important, right? You need to be able to do some degree of configuration and provisioning to be able to, or / management to be able to effective control. What we're talking about here is essentially defining abstractions that would support or mimic essentially the existing provider abstractions, but that would allow basically more effective. So basically would provide smaller pieces of code available for reuse. Now, in terms of the sort of the security of this, you could still say that, okay, now that we made a driver available to do, let's say, deposit flows, what's stopping application from obtaining the driver and using it directly? Well, we have that case today anyway, but we can potentially, as we work on enhancing the internal security mechanisms within ONOS, the internal security ones, we could potentially prevent some of these privileged drivers to be returned directly to applications or be available only to certain subsystems. And that would include the pipeliner, that would include sort of the low-level drivers, which are really intended to be used only for the core subsystems rather than for applications. So we could segregate the configuration type behaviors which applications could consume directly from those that are intended for privileged use.
I guess again, part of my concern here is what I'll use the word bloat, even though I know that's overloaded, in terms of, do we want an SDN controller to grow to increase its capabilities around configuration, or do we say yes, configuration is an important aspect of overall data center management or carrier network management, but let's keep ONOS focused on control and less on some of that configuration stuff, and say, yes, it needs to integrate with something that can provide some of that control. That isn't necessarily ONOS. And can we maintain really just that flow semantics and control semantics in ONOS at kind of a best of breed, do one thing well, and offload some of these other things that we expect to be able to do or need to do with these fallback and default providers into other aspects or other components that are integrated but not part of ONOS.
So
integrated might be a separate process here, might not be a separate microservice, to use that term.
okay. So there's two things, right? Like if you have something that does configuration and you prefer that than what ONOS does, then go ahead and use it. Yeah, go ahead and use whatever you want to use. There are scenarios where people want, and legitimately want, to have configuration and control under the same house. Now, maybe you don't agree with that. That's okay. You don't have to use it. We have a modular framework. You can switch it off. You don't like it, just throw it out, right? And use whatever you want. But other people want to be able to configure devices as well as control them under the same API from the same app, and that's okay. They should be able to. We shouldn't refrain them from doing that. We shouldn't say no. Go off and write your own OBS DB controller. No. Why not? Why? We can have it.
Yeah, I think to also follow up on Ali's argument in favor of bloat, what we found in 8 years of experience with OpenFlow controllers is that configuration, cross-vendor device configuration, is a serious pain point, and it really seems like if we want to move from OpenFlow controllers to a network operating system, that we have to deal with management as well as control.
Yep.
And probably we want to deal with data plane also, but that's other thing.
Right.
But SDN is going to incorporate not just the control plane, but also the management plane and the data plane in the fullness of time.
Exactly. For the optical part.
Sorry, go ahead.
For the optical part that we are working on right now with Mark, it's configuration and control plane, and then they cannot be decoupled in this case.
So ONOS and SDN is now the new Uber EMS NMS system.
Pretty much.
that has worked so well in the past when people have tried to do that.
No, but
Just be careful with the wax that are holding the wings together, the feathers together, because it can cause problems.
You're taking kind of an extreme reaction to this.
No, this is something that bugged me about when I worked on ODL, and now it's going to be something that bugged me as I work in ONOS, right?
But
one thing well, and as you branch out and try to do everything and become that Uber, you're going to do everything okay, but not everything as well as you could.
Okay, so let's take the network management stuff aside from it. Today, some of the devices of our partners allow depositing flows only through something else other than OpenFlow. How do we deal with that?
Yeah, well, I'd like to tell them to take a hike or just implement OpenFlow. Unfortunately, everybody else seems to agree that a more practical approach is to try to get them into the fold and just write a device-specific, let them write a device-specific driver.
Yep. So basically, really, this proposal focuses primarily on improving how the way we support things for the fixed function subsystems, which are for packet intercept and packet emit, flow rules, group setup, and meters.
So, David, I mean, you have a Mac. You get the mail application with Mac, but you can install another mail application.
I'm not disagreeing that you guys can't build this stuff.
No, but what I'm saying is that you can disable it and use your own, right? you have another implementation for configuration that you prefer, go ahead and use it. We're not forcing you.
No, Ali, the argument really is, if with limited resources that ON Labs has, would I rather see those resources focused on building just the best SDN kind of controller that it could, and focus that ONOS on that can be used in multiple places?
Okay, so that's a different question, right? So.
And right now, as you bloat this up,
well, hold on.
I know bloat's overloaded. I get that. I understand that's a very a term that can get the fur on everybody's neck up. It just, those resources get diluted a little bit.
But hold on. I mean, so when we didn't do configuration, people criticized us for doing configuration. Now that we're doing configuration, people are criticizing for doing configuration.
No, hopefully I didn't do both of those. Hopefully I picked one.
Actually, you used to say that we didn't do of VSDP. So I mean, like, how do we get out of this situation? I don't understand.
Yeah, I think the experience has shown that not doing a basic amount of configuration is kind of a non-starter, and it's a barrier to kind of deriving benefit from SDN. And there isn't a good, compelling, open source management platform for SDN that we can use outside of ONOS. So it looks like our only option is to, we could have a sort of federated system where, yeah, there's like a management system, a control system, and a data plane system. But considering that we don't really have that, it seems like if you want to evolve towards a network operating system, it should be a little bit more comprehensive. But the concern about feature bloat and mission bloat is not to be taken lightly. So I think we want to seriously consider everything we do.
So, so point taken, David. So right now, this is basically just a means to address some deficiencies in our fixed function subsystems. Clearly, we need to be on the lookout for getting too far out into the weeds when it comes to provisioning the type activities that stray too far out of the mission, or potentially that prevent us from accomplishing our core mission. So noted. Okay.
All right. So
for the timeline for this thing is. Because I already alluded that the E-code use case will require use of these quote foreign protocols or non-SAN protocols in order to get some of the support necessary for the E-code use case demos. My thought, so that some sort of solution would be required already. So rather than spending the effort on coming up with something custom for this, and then potentially risking setting a precedent, wrong precedent for applications or for others. My thought was that we should prioritize this. It should be a reasonably low complexity and low impact task that could be prioritized for Falcon Sprint 2. That's my thinking, and it's something that I can probably work with, with either Andrea or somebody to get that done. That's something that could be handled fairly well.
But I guess
I'm happy to help with this.
Yep.
There's, there are other approaches to, if the root sort of motivation for this is like, I support these weird devices, I support legacy protocols. Like, there are lots of ways to skin that cat. Changing ONOS doesn't have to be one of them. You can change the device. You can add a proxy transparent. You can add an OpenFlow proxy that translates, OpenFlow extensions into configuration. There are lots of things that could be done that don't require changes to ONOS. So I guess, to maybe echo what David's saying a little bit, you should try to make a compelling argument that this is the right thing to do and the best way to do it for the project.
Yeah, so I guess the way I'm looking at it, this would probably be the least amount of work. We have the driver subsystem. We have so the complexity of this task will be basically just to modify the dispatching, the interaction, the south end of the core, and how it interacts with the drivers to be able to have a fallback, and then implement the 4 or 5 different default providers to deal with the custom protocol. So it should be fairly straightforward task. In my view, it'll probably be less work than actually working with the vendors. In terms of less work, and that work can be condensed much shorter amount of time than would be to work with vendors and coming up with sort of proxy and
so that's
agent-based
the argument that it's the most expedient solution, but is it the right solution in the long term?
I think the foreign protocols are here to stay, and I think insisting on supporting just OpenFlow would be a mistake, because this can be used also to deal with different versions of OpenFlow. This can also be used to deal with different device capabilities. Basically, it is using the device drivers for what it is that they were designed for, is to isolate the device-specific nuances, whether the nuances are tiny and with respect to usage of the same protocol, or whether they're completely major, where one is using OpenFlow versus another one is using some custom CLI. It's completely irrelevant. Right? That's using the device drivers for what they were designed for. So I think it's the right solution, and it also happens to be a reasonably expedient in my view. Okay, so that's just a heads up. We'll probably expect to see a user story for this going into the backlog. All right. So I think since we're out of time, thanks everybody. It was a good discussion. We'll see you next week.